in the department when I was 19 years old. Out of high school, I was working at the old Palace Clothing at 12th and Grand in sales, and an opportunity came to get on the police department because they had just started a tow service. And I applied and was accepted. And during that time, in fact, I could probably say now, I literally grew up on the police department. When I turned 21, I figured this would be a good career to get into. I liked working with the guys. It was a good knit group. Back in those days, it wasn't as big as it is now, and everybody knew everybody. I applied and went through the process and was accepted. And I started the academy on November the 16th, 1962. At that time, the academy went from November 16th to January, so it's a little over 10, 12 weeks really. And my first, during the academy, there's nothing at all like you see today. We had the discussions and the instructors and situational training, which was just out at like Penn Valley Park, and no disturbance calls or anything like that. It was really very basic. Upon graduation, my break-in was at 63rd Street Station, Metro, and my break-in officer, Jim Johnson, and that went through 2 weeks, and we graduated. And then I'll never forget on January, my first at roll call. The desk sergeant at that time was Martin Lawless. And Lawless, during the roll call, everybody's lined up at the upstairs of the old 63rd Street Station. And he said, who refuses to work for Sergeant Wilbur Shaw? And everybody raised their hands, and I was just looking around. And afterwards, I had talking to Jim Johnson, my break-in officer. I said, what was that about? He says, oh, they had a New Year's Eve party, the platoon did, at the old fortress at 85th and Troost, and Wilbur got drunk and tried to shoot Gary Glidewell. And then at that time, I wondered, what in the heck have I got myself into? But it went on, and during the time, one of the most depressing calls I ever made, here's I am a young officer, was a possible attempt suicide, and myself, Sergeant Byron Soward, and another officer, I can't remember his name now, responded to this residence, I think somewhere around Montgomery, and there's a man walking out in front with a butcher knife in his stomach, and a little kid walking around. He's a detective. His name was Tex Merritt. I'll never forget. He told the sergeant, and I says, fellas, if you can take this knife, push it in by another inch, I think we can get it done. So we said, no, Sergeant Sauer said, no, Tex, come on, you're going to go with us. We got him in the car. I was in the back seat. The sergeant was in the front. We went to Baptist because research wasn't built then. Took him in, laid him down, and I'll never forget, he was stripped. The butcher knife was in his stomach. And I was sitting there looking at him, and they was working on him, and the butcher knife going up and down as he breathed. And then the next thing I know, the surgeon was saying, get him the hell out of here, because I guess I was about ready to go. Anyway, that was it. And I found out later that several years later, Tex got the job done. In 1965, 63, we had A cars at that time, and I was riding an A car because of a burglary problem or whatever. And I got a call to report to the station about 6 o'clock in the morning for a prisoner transfer. So I had to park the car and then take the wagon. And I had one of the people that was in the book for investigation of auto theft. And as I was putting him into the wagon, he pushed me aside and took off running. And in those days, we didn't have the handy talkies assigned to us. I ran down to a house on Brookside and broke in, and ran upstairs. And I went next door and I got the people up, used their phone to call, so I need some help. I got a prisoner escapees in the house. John Cowdery and Roger Gibson, some other officers responded. We went into the house and we could hear some scuffling upstairs. And as we went upstairs, we heard them saying, now, get in, now he's going to kill him. So Gibson, Cowdery, and I kicked the door in and went in, and as he was trying to stab one of the children, I shot him twice in the shoulder, and back in those days, the bullets weighed like 200 grams, and it just went through. Anyway, it killed him. And back in those days, the plainclothes unit handled it, and there may have been some downtown people, but all the statements and what have you were taken, and then I was done, and I had to go back to work that night. So there was no administrative leave. You did your job, and that's what you're paid to do, and you went to work. And then down the road, the grand jury, as they do today, returned a no true. So that would have been an exciting time. And in 1966, they started.
Wait a minute, let me lower this a little bit. I changed that. And okay, start over with 1966.
In 1966, they started, well, as a tactical unit. It's not a SWAT team like you see today. It was several squads, and they were like special operations where you went out. If you had a traffic problem, you handled it. If you had a burglary problem, you handled it. And we were trained, FBI trained us in surveillance. And that lasted until 1967. I'll never forget, on February 1967, Harold Oldham said, we made it a year. We had a party down at the Mühlbach. And then from then on, it evolved into what you see today. In 1967, they increased the planning and research unit, and I was asked to come down, and I did. And during that time, some little things are really minor, but the chemical mace, I had to evaluate that and recommend it. And your nylon jackets that you see today, I had to recommend on it and try it out. I'll never forget, on the chemical mace, I went up to the jail, and Dorsey Fleming was the captain, and asked him if it'd be possible to assign this to a sergeant or to somebody up there, if they have a belligerent arrest, to try the mace and see what effects it had on it. Well, Fleming didn't know me from Adam, so he called down to my boss, Marion Cooley, Lieutenant Cooley, and said in a typical commanding officer fashion, I have a Dycus up here who wants to mace all my prisoners, which was a lot of crap. I didn't want to do that. Anyway, we got that started, and as you can see, that's all history. It was approved, and now we have the mace. In 1967, the latter part of 67, there was the LEAP, the federal government program. You get grants, education, and they had one in California they called the Lakewood Project, where you had a helicopter was used just like a district car, and it was very successful. So Chief Kelly wanted an evaluation of it. Well, I was assigned the program and Captain Jack Brady. We went to Lakewood, looked at the program, came back, made our recommendations, said, well, let's try it. We got grants, and the department issued the special order that anybody who wished to apply do so. Well, I applied. Brady was the boss. He was the captain. I think he was a lieutenant at the time. And I was accepted. Jim Lohmeyer, Sergeant Jim Lohmeyer, Officer Billy Reed, Sergeant Bill Mulder, and Sergeant Bill Bumpus, and myself. I was called the Lucky Six. Called something else by some other people who applied and didn't get it, but we went to California, And Billy Reed and I left early because we had to take a road car. So we left, and had enough time, so we went, a little side story, went to Vegas overnight. And I'll never forget, we went to this one casino, I don't remember the name of it, and Reed and I were standing out at the entrance looking around at the casino, and a guy came up, which one of the managers, I guess, or a bouncer, and he said, "Officers, can I help you?" And we looked at him and said, "How do you know we're police officers?" He said, "Well, two things. Number one, your haircut." This is in '68, remember. I had a short haircut. And number two, you cased the place when you walked in. So that means you're either a crook or a cop. And by you looking at you, I know you're a cop. And I'll never forget that to this day. Anyway, we went back, so our training lasted until May. And when we flew back, okay, the instructor, when we went, we were selected, we went to Long Beach, California, at World Associates, which was a subsidiary of Hughes Tool. Hughes Tool made the helicopters. And the models, I think, was 269A models. They looked like little tadpoles, two-seaters. And so we all went to Long Beach, and then the flight instructors, Bill, I can't remember his last name, and Tom Pruitt. Tom was an ex-Kansas City officer, and he was working for Hughes Tool World Associates. And it's the same as any other training. We had to go through ground school and then the solo. And I'll never forget on my solo, everybody, they tell you to go down to the beach, turn left, and fly down to Capistrano. It's just like a car. And when you get down there, there'll be someone down there that'll sign your flight book, and then you come on back. And then after you do that, they had the ceremony, and they cut your tail off, because your shirt tail off, because you soloed. Little anecdotes about Hughes Tool. They took us to Culver City, where they made the helicopters. And Culver City is the old RKO studios owned by Howard Hughes. Well, they took us into the executive dining room, and the menu served that every day is the same menu, because they didn't know if Howard Hughes would show up there, and that's the menu he wanted, and that's therefore they served the same food: fish, chicken, beef, some type of beef, and then vegetables, and et cetera, every day, just because Howard Hughes liked it. At the end of our training, we had a road car, and we flew back. One would drive, two would drive, and one then fly. Two would fly, and our path went down through Arizona, Tombstone, the air base, Tucson, and then over through El Paso and up through Oklahoma. And our flight training was in Kansas. Our commercial, we had to train up to a commercial, was in Fairfax. And then later on in the year in '68, after our training, we went to Doremus, which was Kansas City Southern. That's where the hangar was, I guess, clear up until the time they moved over to 435. And during that time, our flights was just like a patrol, and we answered the radio and anything, just not traffic control. And our flight went from 435, south on 435, west on 435 to State Line, north on State Line to Truman, and then we go around the airport and then back down to the hangar. And one day, the Leawood Country Club is on State Line. And as we were flying along, some of the girls were laid out on the dressing room, no clothes on, sunbathing, and one waved at us, and we waved back. You have never seen such a panic in your life when they left. So, another thing they wanted us to do, they being the command staff, that's a patrol car. And we would go up to Howard Johnson's at Parvin and I-29, land, eat our lunch, or down Kansas City Southern. It was just every day. It was a district car. one of the little legends that goes around is I had to cut 4 days. Now, the reason behind that is not for picking up my cleaning. My wife had a not a graduation, what's the term, reunion, school reunion, class reunion. And I had bought a suit. And the suit was at Tom Houlihan's, which is now Houlihan's Restaurant. So George Brennan was the observer. And I landed down in Brush Creek. And I ran up and got the suit, picked it up, and left. Well, it came down, who landed in? Brady asked me, "Who did you do that?" "Yeah." "Did you do this?" "Yeah." So he had to write it up. And the bureau commander at that time was Coughlin, Charlie Coughlin. Well, he wrote it up, and to make a long story short, I had to cut 4 days on that one. And they sent me out. Got to go with the field for disciplinary action. And after that, I got to go back on. I was a good boy. And in 1969, in fact, it's Valentine's Day, I think, we was on a photo op. I was flying the pontoon ship. It's called Fat Max. And Jack Brady was with Channel 5 in another helicopter. And we were taking some skyline shots and police on patrol type of a deal. And I lost sight of him, and Jack had lost sight of me, and he said, "Come on up easy." Slowly, thought maybe he'd pick me up on the horizon. Well, I was underneath him, and I came up into him, and it knocked the weights out of the rotor blades, and I started shaking. The ship started shaking, so I went into auto rotation, and going to what I thought was a power line. Later I found out it was not. But I flared back to miss the power line, came down and hit a retaining wall, and spun around. And Bob Arnold was my observer. And anyway, the canopy blew out, cut my head, twisted my ankle. I think he fractured some vertebrae in his back. We were laid there. A young man who was an orderly at Menorah came by and got us out. I wish I could remember. I think his name was Gilbert Williams. Got us out and got us away from the craft. And a young man came up later, identified as Gilbert Williams, got us out. He was an orderly, like I said earlier, at Menorah. Got us out and away from the ship. There wouldn't be any danger of fire, and help was on the way. And as far as Gilbert goes, I think he got an award, and also he became a police officer and had just retired not too long ago. One little thing there while I was there, some dirty bastard stole my service revolver and my tie pin. That was personal. That tie pin was a Hughes Tool helicopter tie pin. And we got to the helicopter and got out of the helicopter. No fire because the fuel was running away from the ship. We went. They got to Menorah. I had a concussion and a twisted ankle, and like I said earlier, Bob hurt his back. Well, we were off for several months, and then afterwards we flew for a while. But I didn't remember exactly what I did wrong. I know it was some of my fault, and so I just told Captain Brady I didn't have it anymore. And I worked out of the chief's office for a while on escorts and what have you in the patrol bureau. And then they started recruitment for personnel, and I was assigned a background investigator for personnel. And that was, I was down there from 69 to 71, where I was able, I was promoted to sergeant, passed the, then, it was before the assessment center, you took the written test and had an interview. And I was promoted in 1971. I was assigned to 63rd Street Station, Metro, Country Club, the old one, was on 63rd and Main. And in 1973, the E-tax passed, and since I was assigned to go back to personnel, and because they're starting a testing process and research standards. And Troy Majors was assigned employment section, and through that, that's when the department really shot up in numbers. As Troy went to special assignment on the assessment center, I was in charge of the employment and research standards until 1975, and I had applied for TMI and was accepted, and that too was a government grant where you went down to Warrensburg, and you either go through the administrative or the management, and it was worth so many hours of college credit. Well, I had gotten my degree, which I might add, I started in 1967 in planning and research, and finally got off and on in 1973 my bachelor's in criminal justice through the LEAP program. Well, I was accepted, so they transferred me out of personnel to burglary, out working out of 63rd burglary unit out of 63rd Street. And we got a call on a residence burglary at, I believe it was the 49 or 5000 block of Euclid. And the residence was called the Alligator Lady. And Larry Keller, I gave the case to Larry Keller. I didn't tell him about this, because she'd been there for years, and when I was a district, I remember her then. Anyway, I sent him on a residence burglary. He came back. There's goddamn alligators in there. There's alligators all over that basement in there. Good God, I mean big alligators. I said, well, what's the matter? Well, you didn't tell me. Well, I forgot, Larry. So anyway, I got a kick out of that. And when I went to TMI, I was there. Herb Binsbacher went with me, and we graduated in March of '76. I came back to burglary unit. I was working third watch burglary at down headquarters, second floor. And during this time, participated in the captain selection, which was the assessment center now, and it was held at the old academy out on Nolan Road, the regional academy. And I came out, I think, number 15. Well, at this time, Joe McNamara was the chief. Yeah, it was Joe McNamara, because he took it over from Clarence Kelly. Clarence Kelly went to be the director of the FBI. And I'll never forget, he promoted 15 captains. I think he put 2 majors, 2 or 3 majors, and a lieutenant colonel. And you had your night majors. And I went to North Patrol first watch for, see, that was back in September. And I'll never forget, it's easy, well, anyone who lives up north knows it's easy. I didn't know north, to get lost. And I forget, I was driving around one night, and I got turned around, and I got lost. And I swear I would never ask for directions if it took me 2 weeks. I drove around, I finally found my way around. And anyway, I was there until, just for about a year. And I'm trying to, in 1977, I was asked by then Major Larry Joyner if I would come down to planning and research and take over that unit. I said, well, I'd be happy to. And I was assigned down there, Don Munsterman, Steve Wright, Tom Howell, Bob Bennett, and one of the things that came up there was the building, and Jack Nelson. Jack Nelson was assigned for the grants for the police department's patrol divisions, Metro Patrol, North Patrol. Well, he was on the design committee and followed it on through on the implementation and what have you. While I was there, the joiner wanted us to, and myself, Don Munsterman, and Tom Howell, and I think Steve went with us, to tour various departments. We went to Dayton, Ohio.
Okay. When you do that, it picks up. Go ahead.
Dayton, Ohio, and then Greenville, South Carolina, and I think we went to Charlotte. And that was about a week and a half tour, and just to see how they operate. And went back, and we'll give them our information we had, which is not really that much. After I was there for about a year, and then McNamara left, and Marvin Vankirk became chief, and there's a reorganization, and I went out to Central Patrol Division, Third Watch, and while I was there, Panessa was the division commander, and he made me his exec officer. And during that time, around 1979, I think it was, they I was sent to I was reassigned to take over internal affairs, and during that time we had obvious miscellaneous investigations, which is internal, and then OCC. John Miller was my sergeant, Don Ray was my sergeant, Ron Breedlove was investigator, Jim Nunn was investigator, Marilyn Fortman. And then we went to, after that there was nothing, it's just routine business on that.
You don't remember.
In 1976, during the Republican National Convention, I was assigned to the Alameda Hotel, and that was Ronald Reagan's headquarters at that time. And one thing that we had Jackson County, and one of the requirements was to have somebody stand by the elevator, like a private elevator that took them up to the suite. And my counterpart was a sergeant with Jackson County Sheriff, and he had some deputies, and I said, you know, we need to ask for a volunteer, because we thought it was really be a boring. So we asked this Ron Kellogg, and I said, okay, I'll do it. Well, unbeknownst to us, Nancy Reagan and Ron Reagan just fell in love with him, gave him governor's plates, campaign pins, and everything else. I mean, he just cleaned up. Maureen Reagan just loved him to pieces. And at the end of the convention, when it was Jerry Ford was, we lost to Jerry Ford, Secret Service brought us up, and one of the officers on there was Bill Witzig, and we all lined up, and then the governor, Reagan, would come by and shake our hands, and when he got to Witzig said, you know, Governor, hang in there. And Reagan looked at him right in the eye and says, you know, by golly, I will. And that's how personal the guy was. And that was one of the most interesting experiences I think any officer had during that time. He met a lot of interesting people. Let me digress a little bit. In 1967, while I was planning research, we had the IACP National Convention. And we were assigned to escort or chauffeur chiefs or wives or whatever it was, and then take them on tours and things. And I'll never forget, Chief Kelly received a thank you from the president of the ICP, and who told him that forever Pearl Mesta will remain in your shadows. Well, Pearl Mesta was a noted hostess in Washington, D.C. for all the VIPs and what have you. So that was a good feather in our cap. And that's where the helicopter program, the seeds were planted. Going forward now, in 1960 I was promoted in the year of North Patrol, and I went down to planning and research, and then to internal affairs, and then from there in 1979, to Central Patrol, and then from Central Patrol to the White Collar Crime Task Force, which is called SID today. And we were in a task force with FBI, Food and Drug, ATF, and our cases primarily were hijackings on like coffee, interstate hijackings. We worked one homicide out in Kansas, it's conspiracy. A lot of work, a lot of hard work, and some of the interesting players we worked that nobody will remember today was John Mondane, which was a big cocaine dealer. He's a chiropractor out on Linwood.
Marvin, Dr. Marvin.
Dr. Marvin. And we had...
You remember any details about, like, how did you work John Mundane? And Dr. Marvin, that was stolen property traded for script, I think, meal, but...
Food stamps.
Food stamps, okay. Oh, yeah, you said you...
Yeah, we had food stamps, and then Kim Webb, or Harmon, or Hannon now.
Yeah, you kind of remember that Dr. Marvin investigation?
Well, not too much, because that was actually after he left on that one, after I left.
Okay. What about the John Mondane?
Mondane were there. We had an informant, and Mondane had, I think his mother had some fronts, liquor stores. One at 43rd and Prospect, one at Swope Parkway and Benton, I think it was. And those were all fronts for his cocaine dealing. And we had an informant in there, and we was able to break him, put him down. He put him away for like 15 years. I don't know if he's out now or not.
He is. He just shot a guy down somewhere in trying to rob him or something.
Is that right?
It was in the paper about a month or two ago.
I'll be darned.
He's like an old man now, you know. Of course, he's old man. He's, our age. He's somewhere between 60 and 75, probably.
I'll be darned.
Anyhow, go ahead.
Anyway, that's one of the better cases on Mondane. Put him away.
You remember? Did you make buys off of it? Or?
We had an informant who would we would make buys, and we had an informant who would introduce us. He went up in the witness protection, and then I think he wound up in Ohio somewhere. On the food stamps, Kim Webb bought some property, a goat. Bought a goat with food stamps. We went, what the hell am I going to do with a goat? A car was bought with food stamps. And some of the players, I can't remember the name or the disposition on them. We did a lot of coffee hijackings, and it starts with, I can't remember his name, starts with an M, Italian. John Picone was one we worked. He stiffed us for about $1,200. Anyway, we worked on the hijack, got him about 10 or 15 years on some coffee hijacking.
That was John Picone, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Bandersina?
Yeah.
Was this during the first sting down on, did you guys have anything to do
No.
with that? That was after?
That was after I left.
Okay, all right, go ahead.
That was after I left. And I was down there about 14 months, and then I got a call from then Bureau Commander Jim Kiter wanting me to take over sex crimes unit. And I take that back. I'm getting myself turned around. I had sex crimes unit. I was the first commander of the sex crimes unit. They just formed it. I had that for a year, and that's where I went down to SID, or white collar crime for sex crimes.
You were a captain over sex
I was a
crimes.
captain.
And so do you remember anything? That was kind of a new deal there where you worked with Mosca or whatever.
Well, we had Moxa, and you know, I was probably one of the typical that had ideas about what is and what isn't rape until you meet these victims and what we had to go through, and with Moxa and go through what they've got, and you get a different perspective. And you see where it's not necessarily a sex crime. After leaving that, we did when we were there, we did a kidnapping. One of the things we had would be abductions or what have you. And with our limited funds, we developed a kit, for all intents and purposes, a kidnap kit, and with forms and tape recorders and what have you. One thing we had, I forget, we got a call of possible kidnapping, and some kids were taken off the street. So we all packed up, went out to Central Patrol Division, set up, that was our command center, and we used the response units, TAC units, and coordinated that. And what happened was they kidnapped themselves. They wanted to get in Daddy's pocket, so they'd go out and party. And we were able to trap some phones, and anyway, came back and got the little darlings. After that, we went, like I said before, to white collar. And then from white collar, I went to fraud and fugitive, which is probably one of the most interesting positions. At that time, I had Ron Klosterman as my fraud detective sergeant, John LePage, my forgery sergeant, and Billy Trop was my fugitive. And we handled missing persons and fugitives. And one of the two of the detectives was Steve Kramer and Tommy Robinson. And one of the interesting missing persons we had, and I can't remember the guy's name, Eddie was his first name, and he was last seen at the club at 43rd and Bellevue, a sports bar or something like that. And he was missing. We got digging into him and found out that that was an alias, and that he was a cocaine dealer and a gambler, and that the owner of this bar was into him for several $1,000s, and that he was last seen there, and then he turned up about a month later on Berry Road up north, or 291, up bypass, in a bag. And we could never quite get the owner of that bar. We worked on it. We found at that time like 2 pounds of cocaine, which was an enormous amount at that time. Never could clear that. Another interesting one we had, that a missing person, Patricia Harris? Harris was her last name. She was last seen in an apartment on Holmes. She was dating a guy named Bobby Gross. and I can't remember if that was her name or not. She worked at Patricchio's, and she was last seen leaving Patricchio's. And we got to looking into that and found out that everybody that knew Bobby Gross, females who broke relationships, wound up missing. And we went to, had a meeting with the Bureau Commander, Jim Kiter, Elmer Meyer, and we said, this guy is dangerous. They set up a surveillance with SID, and they were able to get him on an arson, but they never could find the on the homicide. And he was suspected on several things. One thing that happened is the family of, I think it was Patricia Harris, I can't remember her name, hired a retired Captain Bob Heinen. Bob Heinen, we learned, went into Gross's house and got some stuff. Cheryl Morris, and got some stuff with her name on it, and just barely got out of the house before he got in there, before Bob Gross came back. And as he was running across Blue Ridge, got almost killed, hit by a car, and almost died. And we never did know what he found in there, but apparently it was quite extensive. After Bobby Gross won, John LePage got a big case on forgery. And there was the brothers working forgery, the Green brothers, Larry Green, and I can't remember the other one, but they had a chain of command typed out, workers, they had the whole thing, and they were making some big bucks. We were able to bust them up. And one of the biggest ones we were able to work was fraud, the Gypsies. That was Nancy Marks, and Nancy, and then her Johnny's wife. Not Mary, what was her name?
Wasn't Mary?
I can't remember her name. And prosecutors were reluctant to take a case because, well, what do you mean? They knew what they're getting into. Well, what they would do is the old egg with blood in it or ink in it, and then they had cleaned this guy out up north for, I forget, well, he sold his farm for several hundreds, almost $100,000 or more. And finally, I can talk about it now. We made an anonymous phone call to KCTV5 and Stan Kramer, and asked him to look into these cases. Well, he did. Consequently, they blew the case open. We got indictments and prisons for Nancy Marks and her aunt or mother, whoever she was, and then Johnny Marks was a homicide victim. They got her on that too, and she went away for that. So we broke up that ring. I don't know what it's doing today, but that was one of the better cases we worked. And as a consequence of that, we had a seminar, which we developed, and metropolitan agencies came, and we had a detective from Chicago who was an expert on gypsy crime, and he came and gave an excellent presentation, and in fact we got letters of commendation for that. After fraud, I got to be promoted in 1985. I went to Records and Communications, and during that time we were given the responsibility to look into automated fingerprint system. Excuse me, made some initial inquiries and with some shows, looked at it, wrote it up, sent it, and then I left to take over Central Patrol Division, and eventually it came to fruition. After Central Patrol, we were during Central Patrol. We were able to work with the courts and on prostitution, on working like the Avenue and the Troost. We were able to get through the courts a restriction on their location. For example, Trixie couldn't be seen south of Truman Road and east of Troost. And if she was, she'd be violating her probation. So that worked very good. We were able to put a dent in that. Also, when at Central Patrol, we were having a heck of a problem with illegals, and the editor and owner of, I think it's called El Monde, the newspaper, contacted us, can something be done? I said, well, sure. Well, we got a few officers from each squad, or unit, section, and formed a section. Well, they went down there, and they were so effective that we got a call from the owner from El Monde. Well, you guys are really doing a good job. Think you can ease up a little bit on them? Because I guess if they see the car coming, they're going to the barber shop, and like 50, 60 people in the barber shop couldn't even turn around. And then we had problems up at the Memorial on strong arms. And we were able to, I forget how many strong arms break up, several strong arms, recovered numerous auto thefts. It was a good turnout. After Central Patrol, went to Criminal Ethics Division, where I was division commander there with Gary Howell, who was the lab director. And we had just not too far into looking into DNA. And then I was able to, in 1989, go into the private sector, and that's when I put my career to rest, which is probably, and I said earlier, I literally grew up in an apartment, and that's the finest career anybody could ever hope for.